Jimmy Fallon lost his words for the first time in his career. Johnny Depp's voice trembled as he read those lines, and the entire studio fell into a silence so profound that even the cameras seemed to stop breathing. What happened that night on The Tonight Show wasn't just television. It was something that defied every script, every expectation, every rule of late-night entertainment. The audience had come for laughs. They'd come for celebrity banter, for games, for the kind of effortless charm that Jimmy Fallon had perfected over decades. But when Johnny Depp reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded, yellowed letter, everything changed. The laughter stopped. The music faded. And in that moment, 200 people in Studio 6B and millions watching at home witnessed something they would never forget. This is the story of that night. The night Johnny Depp didn't come to promote a movie. The night Jimmy Fallon didn't host a show. The night two men, a piece of paper, and a studio full of strangers became part of something much bigger than entertainment. But nobody saw it coming. Not even Jimmy. 3 hours before the taping, Studio 6B hummed with its usual pre-show energy. The Roots were running through their set list, stage managers barked directions into headsets, and audience members shuffled into their seats with phones ready to capture every moment. It was Tuesday, a standard taping night, and the call sheet listed Johnny Depp as the lead guest promoting his latest film. Jimmy Fallon sat in his dressing room, flipping through note cards prepared by his writers. The segments were mapped out, a funny story about Depp's latest on-set mishap, a game involving accents, maybe a musical bit. Standard fare. Nothing unusual. Jimmy had interviewed Depp half a dozen times before. They had chemistry, history, mutual respect. This would be easy. But Johnny Depp was sitting in his own dressing room down the hall, staring at something in his hands. An envelope. Old, creased, the kind that had been opened and refolded 100 times. The handwriting on the front was shaky, written by someone whose hands no longer obeyed their commands. Inside was a letter. 3 pages. Every word written with love, with pain, with the kind of clarity that only comes when time is running out. Depp hadn't told anyone he was bringing it. Not his publicist, not the producers, not Jimmy. He'd carried it with him for weeks, debating whether this was the right moment, the right place. But something told him tonight was the night. Something told him that if there was ever a platform to honor what this letter represented, it was here. At 6:45 p.m., the studio doors opened. The audience filed in, buzzing with excitement. Tourists from Ohio. College students from Jersey. A retired couple celebrating their anniversary. None of them knew they were about to witness television history. Jimmy walked onto the stage at 7:02 p.m. to thunderous applause. He did his monologue, hit his marks, crushed his jokes. The energy was electric. By 7:30, Johnny Depp's name was announced, and the crowd erupted. He walked out in his signature style, layered, cool, effortlessly Depp, and took his seat next to Jimmy's desk. The first 10 minutes were exactly what everyone expected. Stories about filming in remote locations. Laughs about learning sword fighting. A playful jab at Jimmy's fashion choices. The Roots played a sting. The audience laughed on cue. It was perfect late-night television. And then Johnny Depp reached into his jacket. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The shift was subtle at first. Jimmy was mid-question, something about Depp's next project, when he noticed Johnny's hand move toward his inside pocket. It wasn't a prop move. It wasn't planned. Johnny's expression changed. The playful grin faded. His eyes grew distant, heavy with something Jimmy couldn't quite place. Actually, Jimmy, Johnny said softly, interrupting the flow. There's something I need to do. The studio grew quieter. Not silent yet, but the energy dipped. Jimmy, trained by years of improv and live television, leaned forward. Of course, man. What's up? Johnny pulled out the envelope. It was worn, the edges soft from being handled too many times. He held it carefully, like it might disintegrate if he gripped too hard. A few months ago, Johnny began, his voice steady but quiet, I received this letter. It was sent to my management, forwarded through about 10 people before it got to me. By the time I read it, the person who wrote it was gone. The audience leaned in. So did Jimmy. The cameras, sensing something unscripted, tightened their shots. Her name was Eleanor, Johnny continued. She was 74 years old. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She didn't have much time, but she used what she had to write this. He tapped the envelope gently. She wrote to me because, apparently, I reminded her of her late husband. Something about the way I played a character in one of my films. She said watching it helped her feel close to him again after he passed. Jimmy's face softened. The jokes were gone now. This wasn't part of the show anymore. This was something else. She asked me, Johnny said, his voice cracking slightly, if I could read this letter on television. Not for her, she knew she wouldn't see it. But for her daughter. For her grandkids. For anyone out there who's sitting with someone they're about to lose, or who's already lost someone and doesn't know how to keep going. Behind the scenes, producers in the control room froze. This wasn't on the rundown. But nobody moved to stop it. Jimmy's hand instinctively went to his chest. He glanced at the audience. Faces that had been grinning moments ago were now still, attentive, some already glistening with tears. Johnny, Jimmy said softly. Of course. Read it. Johnny Depp unfolded the letter. The paper crinkled in the silence. He took a breath, steadied himself, and began to read. Dear whoever's listening, he started, and his voice was no longer the voice of Johnny Depp the movie star. It was something softer, something raw. My name is Eleanor, and if you're hearing this, I'm gone. But that's okay. I'm not afraid of being gone. I'm afraid of being forgotten. The studio was completely silent now. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. Even the Roots, who'd seen everything in their years on the show, sat motionless. Johnny continued. I spent 52 years with a man who made me laugh every single day. Even on the days when everything hurt. Even on the days when the world felt too heavy. He had this way of looking at me, like I was the only person in the room, even when the room was full. And when he got sick, when the doctors said there was nothing left to try, he still looked at me that way. Jimmy's hand covered his mouth. His eyes were red. He died 3 years ago. Johnny read, his own voice breaking now. And I thought I'd die right alongside him. But I didn't. I woke up the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. And every single one of those days I asked myself, how do I keep going when the person who made life worth living is gone? A woman in the front row openly wept. The man next to her handed her a tissue, his own face wet. And then one night, Johnny continued, I watched a movie. It was silly, really. Just something to fill the silence. But there was this actor, Johnny Depp. And the way he played this character, the way he looked at the woman he loved in the film, it was exactly how my husband used to look at me. And for 2 hours I felt like he was still here. The letter had 3 pages. Johnny Depp read every word. Eleanor's letter went on. She talked about her daughter, who was trying so hard to be strong but was crumbling inside. She talked about her grandchildren, who didn't understand why Grandma was so tired all the time. She talked about the little things that kept her going. A cup of coffee in the morning, the sound of rain, a song on the radio that reminded her of dancing in the kitchen with her husband. I'm writing this because I want people to know, Johnny read, his voice thick. That grief doesn't mean you've stopped living. It means you've loved so deeply that even the absence of that person shapes your entire world. And that's not a weakness. That's proof that what you had was real. Jimmy Fallon, who'd interviewed presidents and rock stars and never lost his composure, had tears streaming down his face. He didn't wipe them. He didn't try to hide them. He just sat there, one hand on his desk, the other over his heart, listening. So if you're watching this, Johnny read, and you're sitting next to someone whose time is running out, or you're lying awake at night because someone you loved isn't there anymore, I want you to know, you're not alone. You're allowed to hurt. You're allowed to fall apart. But you're also allowed to wake up tomorrow and try again. Because that's what love asks of us. Not to forget, but to keep going anyway. The final line was simple. Thank you for listening. And thank you, Johnny, for reminding me what it felt like to be seen. Eleanor. Johnny folded the letter carefully and placed it on Jimmy's desk. For a long moment, nobody moved. The studio was frozen in collective grief and reverence. Then Jimmy Fallon did something he'd never done in 15 years of hosting The Tonight Show. He stood up, walked around his desk, and hugged Johnny Depp. Not for the cameras. Not for the audience. Just because it was the only thing that made sense. The audience rose to their feet. The applause wasn't loud at first. It was soft, almost hesitant, like they weren't sure if applause was appropriate. But it grew. It swelled. It became something bigger than approval. It became gratitude. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. When Jimmy and Johnny finally pulled apart, Jimmy wiped his eyes and turned to the camera. We're going to take a break, he said, his voice hoarse. We'll be right back. But during that commercial break, something extraordinary happened. The audience didn't return to their phones. They didn't chatter or laugh. They sat quietly, many of them crying, some hugging strangers beside them. A woman in the third row turned to the elderly man next to her and said, My mom just died last month. He nodded and took her hand. Backstage, producers didn't know what to do. This wasn't in the show Bible. This wasn't standard procedure. But the executive producer, a man who'd worked in television for 30 years, made a call. We keep it, he said. All of it. We don't cut a second. When the show came back from break, Jimmy didn't return to jokes. He didn't reset the energy. He looked into the camera and said, If you're watching this at home, and Eleanor's story touched you, I want you to know something. You matter. Your grief matters. And the people you've lost, they're not gone as long as you keep carrying them with you. Johnny Depp sat quietly, hands folded, watching Jimmy speak. And for the first time in his career, Johnny felt like he'd done something that mattered more than any film, any award, any red carpet. The rest of the show was subdued. There were no games, no sketches. Jimmy interviewed one more guest, but the tone was different. Softer. More human. When the show ended and the audience filed out, many of them didn't leave right away. They lingered in the lobby, talking to each other, sharing stories of people they'd lost. One woman, a nurse from Brooklyn, approached a producer. I need you to know, she said, tears in her eyes. My husband died 6 months ago. I've been so angry. So lost. But hearing that letter tonight, it made me feel like I'm not broken. Like what I'm feeling is normal. The producer hugged her. It is normal, she said. And you're going to be okay. The episode aired 2 days later. Within hours, it became the most watched Tonight Show segment in 5 years. Social media exploded. Hashtag Eleanor's letter trended worldwide. People shared their own stories of loss, of love, of finding the strength to wake up when everything hurt. Eleanor's daughter, a woman named Claire, reached out to the show. She sent a video message that Jimmy played on the following episode. My mom would have been so proud, Claire said, crying. She always said the world needed more kindness. More honesty. Thank you for giving her that. Johnny Depp never did another press tour without carrying Eleanor's letter. It became a talisman for him, a reminder that fame and fortune mean nothing if you're not using them to connect, to heal, to remind people that they're not alone. And Jimmy Fallon? He kept a copy of the letter in his dressing room. On hard days, when the jokes didn't land or the show felt hollow, he'd read it. It reminded him why he did this job. Not for ratings. Not for awards. But for moments like that. Moments when television stopped being entertainment and became something sacred. Years later, in an interview, Jimmy was asked what the most important moment of his career was. Without hesitation, he said. The night Johnny Depp read Eleanor's letter. Because that was the night I learned that the best thing you can do as a host isn't to make people laugh. It's to make them feel less alone. Eleanor never got to see the impact of her words. But her daughter did. Her grandchildren did. And millions of people around the world did. Because one night, on a stage in New York City, a movie star and a talk show host broke every rule of television and did something far more important. They reminded us that we're not alone. That grief is love that has nowhere to go. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply listen. The letter still sits on Jimmy's desk. A reminder that the best moments in life aren't scripted. They're felt.